Good afternoon and welcome to day 4 of the IMF World Bank week here at the Atlantic Council. My name is Jörn Fleck. I'm the Senior Director of the Europe Center at the Atlantic Council, coming to you live from the Atlantic Council headquarters here in Washington, D.C. It is my privilege to welcome you to this discussion with the Minister of Economy and Finance of Greece, Kyriakos Pierrakakis. Minister, a warm welcome to the Atlantic Council. The minister joins us for another event this week with dozens of the highest level financial policy and decision makers from all over the world who have come to Washington for this year's IMF World Bank spring meetings. This is also part of our transatlantic economic dialogues, a joint effort at the Geoeconomic Center and the Europe Center to maintain and grow dialogue and debate on the critical issues shaping the future of the U.S.-European economic relationship. Front and center in discussions and events at this year's spring meetings have clearly been the Trump administration's tariff announcements, trade policy, and their impact on the global economy. Trade decisions announced these last few weeks will have lasting implications for years to come for some of the United States' closest allies and trading partners, Greece included. In our conversation with Minister Pierrakakis, we will of course discuss the perspective from Athens on the global economic outlook and the trade policy front. But beyond the global uncertainty, we will also explore Greece's comeback and economic success story in recent years after a decade of difficult years, which has included the upgrading of Greece's credit rating and the news that Athens is well ahead of schedule on debt repayments, together with impressive economic growth of over 2% in recent years, including in the IMF's growth projections released earlier this week. So we have lots to discuss with the minister who became the country's economy and finance minister earlier this year, and brings a rich experience of government service to his current post. He previously served as the Minister of Education, Religious Affairs, and Sports, and prior to that as the Minister of Digital Governance, where he led a widely acknowledged, impressive transformation effort of Greek public digital services and the digital sector. He's also no stranger to the United States, having completed his graduate studies at Harvard and MIT. Mr. Minister, thank you for joining us, and I look forward to the conversation with my colleague Josh Lipsky, the Chair of International Economics here at the Atlantic Council and the Senior Director of our Geoeconomic Center, which leads the Council's extensive IMF and World Bank Week programming. Josh, over to you for the conversation.
Jörn, thank you, and thanks to all of our colleagues at the Europe Center for the partnership across this week and always at the Atlantic Council. Honored to partner with you and your incredible team. Minister, welcome to the Atlantic Council. Welcome to Washington.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much.
So we're going to jump right in. We have 25 minutes and a lot to cover. Let's start with Greece's economic outlook. Jörn talked about the relatively positive numbers we saw in the WEO, especially as you compare to other countries in the Eurozone. Certainly the success story if we think of where Greece has come over the past decade. But I'm curious to hear, one, how we got here, but also equally important, where you see things going forward structurally within Greece and also the headwinds Europe is facing more broadly.
First of all, echoing what you just said, I mean, if we think about the trajectory, thinking about Greece 15 years ago, for instance, actually it was 15 years ago to the day yesterday that we signed our first memorandum, our first bailout package with the IMF and the European partners. And it was quite, I would say, symbolic having the Greek Minister of Finance 15 years later participating in an IMF panel called Success Stories, Pathways to Success. This showcases the strength of the Greek people, the willpower of the Greek people. The harshness of the measures and the harshness of the policies that we had to implement was significant. It should be underlined. But now, after many years of prudent fiscal policy, you mentioned what got us here. I would say, having a very prudent policy on fiscal matters, which gets you to a primary fiscal surplus of 4.8%, as announced a couple of days ago, a headline surplus of 1.3%, a de-escalation of our national debt by 60% in the last years, post-COVID bailouts, and a growth rate of 2.3%, which is more than double that of the EU average, overall showcased this fiscal strength. Together, vis-a-vis our banking system, during the Greek crisis, our banks had 40% non-performing loans. Now it's less than 5%, less than 4%. And of course, a spectrum of significant reforms happening horizontally throughout the economy since 2019, since the election of Kyriakos Mitsotakis. I think that those reforms have enabled us to unleash our growth potential to a very large extent. To answer the second part of your question, we should double down, triple down on those reforms, which I would say should have a duality, a dual nature. On the one hand, unleash pockets of growth. As it was mentioned before, I used to be the digital minister and the education minister. I will just cite two examples of how you can unleash pockets of growth. Vis-a-vis education, we were amongst the few, actually the two countries in the world, which prohibited the foundation of private universities. It's very idiosyncratic why we did that, but it had been the case in Greece since the 60s. We passed a law last year which allows for the foundations of chapters of foreign universities in Greece. There was a Deloitte study which was released a couple of days ago, which maps the economic impact of that policy. It will start from 0.6% in the first year, annual impact on our GDP. It can go up to 1.7% over a decade. We have a huge Greek academic diaspora. We can bring foreign students in Greece. We can bring Greek students who study abroad, enable them to stay at home. If you just think of what Italy has done in this regard, only Florence has 41 chapters of foreign universities, and we didn't, because our system, our institutional design didn't allow for that. Second example, data centers. In 2019, when we took office, Greece was in, I think, the so-called 301 list of the US Secretary of Trade. That list being a list that you don't want to participate at.
Using that list quite frequently.
Not only did we exit that list with, again, prudent policies, obtaining licenses for our software was the prudent policy in this regard, but at the same time we spoke with the hyperscalers, with Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, and we created a policy of public cloud first in our public sector. And this new law acted as a signal to enable US investment in Greece and have all three hyperscalers develop their data centers in Southeastern Europe within Greece. So on the one hand, we should do that, focus on pockets of growth. On the other hand, cut red tape. Within the European Union, we're discussing about eliminating barriers between member states. This is the Draghi report, this is the Letta report. We have barriers that are equivalent to tariffs. In services, 110%, in manufacturing, 45%. You also have barriers within member states, and we're one amongst the very few countries that has managed to map those barriers in a national system, where we have mapped our full bureaucratic impediments to domestic and foreign investment, and we plan to start eliminating those barriers one after another.
So let's talk about some of the challenges inside of Greece right now. Inflation has been a little higher than the Eurozone average. At the same time, wage growth has been a top concern for citizens. So how do you balance those pressures? You have a demand for higher wage growth. You have some of the inflationary pressures within Greece. How do you see that along with what you're talking about in terms of reducing and streamlining?
Vis-a-vis inflation, I would say that the performance is marginally higher than the EU average this year. Our analysis, our domestic analysis is 2.4%. The overall EU target is 2%. We plan to de-escalate it. We're marginally higher because we're a bit more reliant on services, and services inflation is higher. We're marginally higher because we're growing faster than the rest of the European Union. Nonetheless, inflation will de-escalate in the coming months. It has already de-escalated so far, starting from the 10%, which used to be the case a couple of years back. Vis-a-vis wage growth, real growth in wages since 2019 is 11% if you eliminate inflation. The EU average is a bit more than 4%. So we're catching up, which is the overall, I would say, policy of the government. Catch up with the EU average on all fronts. Wherever we can, we plan to surpass it. Minimum wages have increased as well. We had an increase in the minimum salary a couple of weeks ago as well. Overall, we understand that there are pressures within the Greek society, especially, for instance, in rents in the Athens region. You can see that rent prices have increased a lot. We're doing our best to help both on the supply side, which takes a little bit more time to catch up with demand, but also with short-term solutions in order to alleviate that pressure. But overall, the general economic health will help 100% of the population, as long as we are fiscally prudent, as long as we continue in the pathway of reforming all sectors of the economy and unleashing growth and eliminating red tape. Growth and this growth dividend, this growth premium will reach every household in Greece, if it hasn't reached so already, because as I mentioned, the numbers speak for themselves.
So the reforms are commendable, the success story is commendable. We think, as you said, at the 15-year mark, and everywhere Greece has come. We were talking before about Greece is performing well as a safe haven asset in this environment. But how does this be sustainable over the long term? You've seen a lot of success, but how do you enshrine some of this structurally to make sure it doesn't get reversed in the future or there's not backsliding?
Look, if we speak about the fiscal side of things, being fiscally prudent in Greece, generationally speaking, I would say it's more than a policy. After a lost decade, it's a regime. It becomes ingrained in the public psyche. And it is ingrained, and you can see that from our electoral performance. We as a government have been elected on the basis of stabilizing the economy, stabilizing the country, and unleashing growth for every household. And you can see even in our polling that the Greek population has metabolized the lessons of the crisis. It's part of our collective DNA that we shouldn't be repeating that. Plus, with regards to my generation, I would say, bluntly, we don't plan to pass the bill to the next generation as the previous generations did to ours, if you look at recent Greek history, and especially the Greek 20th century. So overall, we will continue to be fiscally prudent. This is point number one. And point number two, unless you create positive tailwinds, you cannot counter the negative headwinds. And this is what we want to do right now vis-a-vis the whole global economic debate, which is, I would say, the overall topic of discussion in the IMF and World Bank meetings this week.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to go to next. Tell me your impressions so far. Have you met with any Trump administration officials? And how do you see the headwinds coming on trade wars for the EU more broadly? And how is it going to affect Greece?
My only meeting so far was with Michael Kratsios, who is the head of the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And the discussion was primarily on technological issues, which is part of the investment generation that we want to achieve. Just to add a point on this, because my understanding is that we're going to speak about investments as well. Greece plans to pass legislation similar to the one that you have in the United States, CFIUS. So basically, we will do foreign investment screening from a national security standpoint in Greece as well. Our Ministry of Foreign Affairs has started developing such regulations and legislation. This is critical for any technological debate, and technology is a critical factor for economic growth and economic success. Now, vis-a-vis tariffs, which is, I would say, the overall debate, which we are literally or tacitly having both at the Eurogroup and here at the IMF meetings, I would say, we believe in free trade. We're a free trading nation. We participate in the European Union, which, our acumen is a free trade acumen. And in this regard, we hope to have a negotiation which will produce the best possible result for both sides, both for the European Union and for the United States. We ideally want to have a zero tariff world, especially a zero tariff world between allies. And this is what we should be working towards. Now, vis-a-vis Greece's exposure, I would say, should we have an elevated tariff environment on behalf of the United States? The first order effects for Greece are limited. 5% of our exports are channeled to the United States economy. It's primarily agricultural products, olives, olive oil. It's cement, it's aluminum. It's 1% of our GDP. The first order effects are limited. The second order effects worry us, as they worry every country in the world. A potential American recession, a potential European recession, obviously touches us and touches every country significantly. Literally, some countries are islands. Metaphorically, no country is an island. And in this regard, this is something that we should try to focus on. What is the strategy on our behalf? The strategy on our behalf, given that we're primarily worried about uncertainty rather than any specific policy per se, uncertainty in the economic climate is the most worrisome factor. We should double down on our policy of positive tailwinds, more reforms, eliminating more red tape, doubling down on the strategy of fiscal prudence and reforming our economy. And this is what will render Greece further a safe haven in such an environment.
Do you have a view on how the EU more broadly should think about retaliation or negotiation with the administration? We've seen this situation where there was the 20% reciprocal tariffs, The retaliatory package was announced, but right at the same time, President Trump brought it back down to 10%. But obviously, we're only paused right now, and we come back to this issue in July.
I mean, our official position, as described by the Prime Minister, by Kyriakos himself, both on media discussions and in international fora, is that we should have, as I mentioned, a negotiation which will lead to a zero-tariff environment. We want this negotiation to happen. We believe that between allies, we should try to eliminate barriers. We should try to eliminate any type of impediment that we can have in our trade relationships. It is true that those impediments existed in the past on both sides, not extremely elevated, but they were there. Thus, a negotiation can be beneficial vis-a-vis removing them, and this is what we're going to try to work towards.
Well, let's talk about China, because this is what everyone is talking about here in Washington this week. U.S.-China, this is where the trade war has reached the inflection point, 100+% tariffs between the countries. How does Greece see that situation? Obviously, Chinese investments in Greece, the Port of Piraeus, have been an issue that have been talked about for years. How do you see navigating this war between U.S. and China on the trade front?
I mean, in reality, in the context of the trade debates that we have overall, the European Union and Greece will try to diversify trade, generally speaking. Now, India, for instance, is such an example, and we're hoping that Greek products will find their way in the Indian market to a much broader extent than what is the ex-ante case.
I was in New Delhi when Prime Minister Mitsotakis spoke a year ago. I remember that speech.
Absolutely. Now, vis-a-vis China, we're generally open to investments. We want to establish and deepen our bilateral relationships, but as I mentioned, from a lens, from a standpoint of our strategic and geopolitical relationships. We value our geopolitical relationship with the United States on all fronts, on many fronts. Since the Marshall Plan, since the Truman Doctrine, even today, this relationship is, I would say, underlined by the Greek diaspora. It's underlined by bilateral ties that are extremely strong on every occasion and on every, I would say, set of context. In this regard, foreign investment in Greece will be a function, as I mentioned, of this new regulation, of this new national security regulation.
How will this work, this new CFIUS?
It's similar to any type of similar regulation that you have in the world, similar to CFIUS. But if you want to see at how we view this relationship, I think that investments in the 5G technological grid showcase our mentality about how we should be moving. To give you one example, in our core of the 5G network, we only used European equipment. We allowed for other equipment on the antennas of the 5G network. This was similar to the UK policy deployed on 5G. Generally speaking, we believe that we should deepen our ties in the context of our national interest.
And so how do you see you mentioned this, leveraging external investments, how you can bring more in diversification. You mentioned India, but are there other partners you're looking toward right now?
The Middle East, India, our broader region, and plus in the context of what I mentioned previously, the Draghi and the Leto report underline that the relationship that we have between member states of the European Union, it's less strong than the relationship that exists between states of the United States, bilaterally in services, in manufacturing, etc. So we need to eliminate those barriers. We need to remove them in order to unleash our full potential, which we have within the Union. And speaking about barriers globally, we have barriers internally, and we have barriers within. So, barrier elimination should be a core policy. This is, I would say, government efficiency, if you want to frame it in different terms. And this government efficiency is a broad term. It's the north and the compass. The map, the specific policy, the specific strategy that you will deploy vis-a-vis attaining it is commensurate with the values of every country, of any country. It's certainly something that we want to achieve domestically.
So we have about 10 minutes left. Anyone watching online, you can use askac.org. We'll bring in as many questions as we can. I want to ask you about the digital euro. Important project the ECB is running. You have a background in this for your previous portfolio, digital transformation. How do you see the digital euro? How do you think Greece and Greek citizens would adapt and adopt a digital euro if and when it gets rolled out?
We're 100% for it. I think it's a great initiative. It's an initiative of the ECB, of Christine Lagarde. Personally, I believe that, generally speaking, the integration of digital in the economy has many positive spillover effects. I've been speaking about our primary fiscal surplus. What was the core headline vis-a-vis Greece's economic performance on the previous decade? It was tax evasion, right? It was the informal economy. We have managed to capture a significant portion of that informal economy using digital means in our economic system, connecting our POS with the average Greek company. having this policy enabled us to capture more than half of the VAT gap, the value-added tax gap, which we had in our revenues. This is one such story. So overall, enabling digital payments for us, or for many member states in the European Union, can be very beneficial. But I would say overall, digital is a game changer for all policy areas of the economy. It's a game changer for the justice system, for instance. You have been studying and focusing on Greece. One of the other areas which concerns us is delays, which can occur in the justice system in Greece vis-a-vis having a court ruling. The digitization of the system enables you to have a quicker response, to have a quicker reaction of the system. The digitization of the public administration, the digitization of the cadastral process, which was it was a question in Greece, the completion of the cadastral process, since the reign of King Otto in the 19th century, and we're finishing it up. I mean, after having excluded all other possibilities, it took us some time. But overall, if you add everything up, the growth premium of all those reforms, especially of the obvious ones, is significant, and this is what renders the country one to be considered successful at fora like the one I participated yesterday.
And what do you think the ECB roadmap is? We're looking at a pilot project now, but within the next several years, it'll be expanded?
There are many countries which have already established their own national systems. We are one of them, and we passed a law a couple of weeks ago, prepared by my predecessor, Kyriakos. And the law effectively enabled us to have this national payment system to be mandatory for every seller. So it's very good that member states of the European Union are implementing this, but there are still more than 10 members which do not have such national systems. This is why the initiative of the ECB is correct. This is why we should be having the digital euro. So overall, I think that the roadmap will be established centrally by Frankfurt, and it's a roadmap that we plan to fully adhere to.
So let's talk about the IMF and the World Bank, the reason we're all here this week. I think Greece has a special relationship with the IMF, given everything that's happened over the past 15 years. We had a very interesting and important speech by our Treasury Secretary, Secretary Bessent, yesterday about how the U.S. sees these institutions. What do you see as the value of the IMF and the World Bank and the Bretton Woods institutions writ large?
To be fully blunt, the trajectory of our relationship with the IMF followed the trajectory of the Greek financial crisis. There were times where that relationship was extremely difficult. Now, of course, the relationship has shifted because Greece, in the process, has managed to fully reform itself, upgrade itself, render itself fiscally prudent, and be considered one of the countries that is underlined as a case study. But having said this, we believe in those institutions. When Dean Acheson wrote the book, the name of that book was Present at the Creation. No generation plans to be present at the demolition. We plan to be present at the evolution, though, because it's like the famous Lampedusa book, the Leopard. For things to remain the same, things need to be continuously shifting. Thus, we need to continuously integrate reforms, change the nature of those organizations, to continue to serve the same purpose. What is the core purpose of the IMF? It's the lender of the last resort, or the lender of the last resort. It should remain so. The way, though, this is structured should evolve. And if you look at the IMF's presence in Greece through the 3 bailout packages, the evolution was present from the first package to the third package. There were problems with some of the policies that were implemented originally, but those policies in the process changed. The stance of the IMF changed. In the second bailout package, we managed to restructure our debt, which we should have perhaps done by the first package. Generally speaking, when we think of reforms, I think that we should be cognizant of the fact that reforms, if I were to make a metaphor, have a transplant nature. You need to have donor-receiver compatibility. You should think in terms of ends, not in terms of means. You should be achieving fiscal prudence, but the mechanism, the roadmap, needs to be context-related, needs to be context-relevant. And the context is political, the context is historical, the context is socioeconomic. And in this regard, we should be keeping the means as strategic, but we should be quite flexible vis-a-vis the ends.
So do you agree with this assessment?
The inverse of what I said.
Yeah, I understood what you said. This back to basics, this message from the U.S., which not just the Trump administration, the Biden administration also said, at least for the IMF, that it's gone, I think, as Secretary Bessent.
What I would say here is that I think we should all participate in a multilateral fashion vis-a-vis the role of the IMF and how it should be evolving. and we should plan to be on the table and discuss with one another what types of policies and what types of presence we expect the IMF to have. I don't believe that this should be a discussion made ex ante. It should be a participatory discussion happening on the table, and we plan to participate on this discussion.
So give us a sense. It's your first meetings as finance minister. You're new in the role. How have you found everything so far, the conversations you're having inside the rooms, and the outlook? I think it's important for people to understand the mood coming into these meetings.
I mean, overall, the message that I want to convey in my new capacity is that Greece is back. It's the same message that the Prime Minister is echoing. And, putting our performance into context showcases that. And I've had many interesting meetings with my colleagues, other ministers of finance, international institutions, investors. Generally speaking, we want to showcase, we want to signal that Greece is a very interesting place to invest. It's a very interesting place to study. And we hope that we can continue and sustain the policies that have led us here, because we believe that the dividends of growth that we can have, even in challenging environments, even in challenging times, can be even more important, can be even more significant.
So I have just over 3 minutes left. I'll try to get 2 questions in quickly if I can. One, your view on capital markets union, integration within the Eurozone, the projects which we seem to finally see have some traction, long talked about, but feels like a new energy behind them. Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. I mean, we're all for it. Banking union, savings union, investment union. Generally speaking, the capital markets union is something that we need to achieve. Overall, the theories of EU political integration, neo-functionalism, what do they posit? That the European Union metabolizes crisis in order to deepen itself. Ideally, we should be anticipatory in terms of how we think, in terms of institutional design. But nonetheless, once you have a crisis, you should integrate the lessons of that crisis in the maximum anticipatory manner possible. Right now, I don't think that we have the luxury not to further integrate. This is exactly the point of Draghi and Letta, and this is exactly what we should be trying to achieve in the coming weeks, not even in the coming years or in the coming months.
And do you think it's realistic?
I think it's possible. Realistic or not, I think we will find it ex post. But and since something is more than possible, it's probable, then it's realistic to say that it can be achieved if the political will is on the table. And it's, to my view, to our view, the political will is on the table right now.
And that's in the conversations you're having with your colleagues, the other finance ministers. Do you feel a difference?
It was part, I would say, of our last meetings as well in Warsaw. It's part of our overall view of how we should be treating the current situation. Positive tailwinds against the negative headwinds.
So, final question for you. We invite you back in October. We hope we have an upgrade to all forecasts, as we always say when we invite the ministers back. What do you want to see happen with inside Greece over the next 6 months as we go through this process to get an even positive trajectory, given the headwinds we talked about?
Positive movement, reforms, macro reforms and micro reforms, things changing on a weekly and on a daily basis. And believe it or not, I mean, this was my experience in my previous capacity as digital minister as well. The value of eliminating a barrier every day, the value of a new policy every single day, and the value of reforms happening, which were there, discussed for decades, but happening with a very strong pace, with stride, is something that the Greek population much appreciates. And it's something which is, to quote a term that you used previously, absolutely realistic to achieve.
We'll leave it on that note. Minister, thank you for being with us. We wish you good luck at the meetings. I know you're headed over to the IMF after this. We welcome you back to Washington anytime. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. We have a series of special events the rest of the day. We have Spain's finance minister coming up within an hour and a half, so stay tuned to all the events. Atlantic Council IMF World Bank Week. You can find the agenda on our website. We wish everyone a pleasant rest of the day.